his computer. Welcome everyone to the monthly seminar on spirituality and health. Today we have Dr. Nader Tadros will be speaking on the topic of the world needs a father global movement, helping fathers bring heaven home. And Dr. Tadros is a visionary academic family physician with over 30 years of global experience integrating evidence-based innovation with community care. He trained across New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. He taught residents and medical students at Thomas Jefferson, Inspira, and Campbell University School of Medicine internationally. He developed curricula with the University College of London for new Giza in Egypt, launched the family medicine residency in Bahrain, and co-founded a model training hospital in New Cairo, Egypt. Dr. Tadros blends institutional strategy with humanitarian relief, treating refugees in Syria, Sudan, Haiti, and the Philippines. He's privileged to have led the most improved global U.S. Air Force medical team in 2011. He holds multiple teaching awards. He currently splits his year between Egypt and Ada, Oklahoma, serving as Chickasaw Nation Family Medicine Residency faculty and initiating the global movement arm of The World Needs a Father in Oklahoma last February. So with great pleasure, I introduce to you Dr. Nader Tadros. So Nader, take it away.
Thank you so much, Dr. Koenig. It's always been a pleasure to interact with you over the years. And hopefully one day we'll be in person. We've done it so much online, but you've contributed a lot to my learning. So I'm glad to share a little bit about stuff that I've learned over the years as well. One of the things about the biographies is it doesn't, allow typically for some of the most important things in life, which has to do with the hurting points in life or the, points of pain in life that sometimes we learn so much more from than the things that the world would deem as success. So, one of the reasons why this movement impacted me so much is it really integrated a lot of things that have been fragmented in the world that I couldn't really connect the dots for, just through regular routine academic medicine. So the exposure to different cultures, different settings of working as a family physician has left me with a lot of questions about just throwing more medications at people and not really dealing with the root causes or learning what the root causes might be. So it's been a journey and still is. I ended up in New Jersey starting some counseling arms in the practice because of the need for the psychological and spiritual needs. And then we also had a chaplain at some point. So it's been a process of really learning more and more how to bring the human being together. So thank you. So, I grew up having a loving and, father and mother. However, I think they did the best that they can with what they knew. And some of it leaves people in need. So some of it could be using the typical model of a father providing, but providing what exactly? It could be just financial. It could be encouraging. It could be discipline, right? But as we will see, some of the research and some of the evidence in the world needs a father. Most of these slides, by the way, as a disclaimer, these are not mine. 95% of them are not mine, and they're open for the public. It's free on the worldneedsafather.org. And it's also a movement for mothers. It's not just fathers, but father is the most nebulous role, I think, of the two. It's easier to understand the mother's role as somebody that bears children, nurtures them. And, I think most cultures agree about the role a lot more than fathers. Even In the literature, I think the father role is getting more and more acknowledged over time with research. So I'll go ahead and start with the presentation. One of the greatest spiritual, social, and economic and psychological curse on humanity today is fatherlessness in every country. Miles Monroe, it was a Jamaican, well-known leader and figure, passed away in 2014. So he'd been to about half of the world's countries after he made that statement. So where did this movement start? The founder of the movement, his name is Kasi Karstens. He is from South Africa. He's become a very good friend of mine and a mentor over the last few years. I spent some time in his home a few years ago, and I'm just really impressed by how he's opened what he's learned to people to come in and give more momentum to this movement. So it started when he was a chaplain for the South African national rugby team and was visiting a refugee clinic in Tanzania where Congolese refugees resided. And he was just interviewing some of the elders and asked them, what happened? And then, without going to gory details, basically they said, this one tribe came in and started massacring this other tribe, lined them up, started chopping them to pieces with machetes. And he said 3 weeks prior, those two tribes were in a house of worship together. So he really just threw his hands up, obviously as a chaplain has spiritual, emphasis in his life. And he said, basically, God, what is going on here? And he had a revelation that the main cause of this is fatherlessness. That cannot be just addressed on a superficial basis. So he really dived into research to understand what is going on. So this encounter was in 2002 at the refugee clinic, or refugee, sites. And then he later, after having had 4 grown children leave home, his wife came up and said to him, I think God wants us to adopt. And he said, I'm done. I was just done, with my last kid going off, and I'm happy with that. And nah, you're wrong. And then he took some time, and then he felt like that was what he needed to do. So they adopted. He's white Afrikaans, and he adopted a black South African girl. I think she was 14 at the time. Her name is Abby. I actually met her down there. And after a few weeks of having her in their home, one time she came and called him daddy. And that struck something in his mind and heart that made him even dig in deeper about what is fatherhood? And through research for several years, then the World Needs a Father movement was born in 2011, and it has now spread into close to 120 countries. And this is basically a movement that is decentralized. So every country, every place where this movement is really determined by the people, the cultural mores of the country or the culture, to adopt whatever they believe is relevant and to run with it. So it's based on volunteers. It's not centralized anywhere. So looking at fatherlessness, the statistics show a significant amount of correlation with that. So virtually every major social pathology has been linked to fatherlessness: violent crime, drug and alcohol abuse, teen pregnancy, suicide, all correlate more strongly to fatherlessness than any other single factor. Children in father-absent homes are almost 4 times more likely to be poor. There's significant more drug use among children who do not live with their mother and father. Children living with married biological parents have significantly fewer behavioral problems than children living with at least one non-biological parent. So the physical and emotional impact, studies show that the telomere, which is basically the cap on the DNA that kind of protects it, gets affected by fatherlessness. There's a loss If there's a loss of a father at 9 years of age, this can decrease lifespan by 14%. 80% of young children in psychiatric institutions come from fatherless homes. They're 5 times more likely to commit suicide if in the absence of a father. Bullying, both on the receiving and the giving part of bullying, is affected by fatherlessness. Poor self-esteem, poor grades, poor social skills. Hypertension is magnified when there's no father and diminished by 46% when a dad significantly is involved. Trust, empathy, and socializing skills are much better when you grow up with a father. Children in grades 7 to 12 who have lived with one biological parent instead of 2 report lower grade point average. Compared to peers in intact families, adolescents in single-parent families and step families were more likely to engage in delinquency. And adolescents in father absence homes were more likely to report being sexually active and have teenage pregnancies compared to adolescents living with their fathers. So fatherlessness scars the whole society. As a family physician, I can't help but be involved in the community. It is not just the family, it's the community, because we see people coming in sometimes with a lot of similar situations in a given community, and we try to connect the dots. Fatherless men tend to be players instead of leaders. So they prioritize pleasure over purpose, and because they are ill-equipped for manhood and paralyzed by fear failing. But how to restore society? It's a big task, but you can rebuild society by starting at home, which is really the building block for our society. So even though this movement started by a Christian, who was a chaplain and had Christian biblical roots, it is something that is actually widely used in a lot of different circles by different belief systems. In Islamic countries, Hindu, Buddhist countries, and with people that don't believe in God. So there is a common denominator in this whole thing of fatherlessness in the homes and how it affects societies. So when you start looking at this fundamental building block of society, the family, it impacts school, professional world, sports, entertainment, and places of worship. So let's look at the impact of motherhood, fatherhood, and when are the critical stages when that happens. So if you look at, and I'm here with Dr. Koenig, who's a psychiatrist, and perhaps a lot of other psychiatrists, so I'm probably speaking out of terms, but please feel free to put your emphasis on what is appropriate and what, something's not accurate. But according to the studies, what I've seen, and I've kind of looked at some of the literature backing some of this stuff up, the mother impact is really from 0 to 5, and perhaps even in the womb, as we understand. And a lot of it has to do with the intellect. When the brain is really infinitely kind of growing, the connections, and apparently at age 18 months is really when there's a big, kind of algorithmic growth in the brain. And a lot of that happens, by what the mother does, because the mother speaks to the child, has eye contact with the child, is physical, intimacy. All of that helps these neurons connect in incredible ways. If you miss that window, you probably cannot catch up fully. You may be able to catch up to some extent, but you'll probably have something missing there. And it may create what's called a wound, not so much in the psychological world terminology, more would be trauma, I guess, would be the more psychological, psychiatric terminology. Father's impact comes more important between the ages of 6 to 11. They still have an impact, of course, in the first 5 years, and maybe even in the womb, as they've done studies where the father's voice is being recognized when he talks to the baby or talks to mom. but we see the biggest impact between ages 6 to 11. And we'll talk about that more later. And then you start seeing the peer influence from 12 to about 18, where the child, the teenager, is growing to really identify with peers and kind of isolating or becoming more individual from the parents. And then the father's impact, which interestingly comes back around 19 to 21 age, where the identity part comes into play. So if the father had a good connection with the children, he might be a person that the children come back to for this very important thing. After age of 21, culture, impact, and training for life, I guess, becomes more important. Doesn't mean that the father and mother impact does not play a role in all of these other stages, but we're just talking about the major one. So when we're looking at building society, it's not like building a Lego isolated pieces to put things together, but you're looking at an integral person. We're still trying to understand the complexity of human beings, which is the most complex of anything that we know of in all the world we live in. Doesn't even come close, any of the things that we've built. We may be able to multiply one aspect of one thing, the human being, to a much higher degree, but to have all that together in this limited space of the body of the human being and to do these amazing things is still a huge step to decipher. So how all the mind, emotions of the will, which, part of the soul, and the physical and spiritual all play together are something we're still kind of learning about. So we need to build human beings understanding that they are human beings and are built at home. So we need to kind of really focus on how do you build these human beings at home and don't miss these opportunities. And if you do miss opportunities, how do we try to restore some of that? So here's a model looking at kind of the integrated self. So in the center would be the spirit of the ego, and from that possibly emerges values. The mind and the emotions are affected by that. Decisions and behavior are what we see. And a lot of times we, in medicine, unfortunately, just kind of try to look at the behaviors and the decisions and not really go and look at the body as molecules and chemicals and neurons, not so much the other stuff that from it emanates so many more things. So I think we are learning more and more to kind of look at this holistic view. One of my favorite sayings is by Andrew Taylor Still, who's the founder of osteopathic medicine. He said, the object of a physician is to find health. Anybody can find disease, which I think is pretty profound. So how should we go about doing this? We need to focus on training fathers and mothers and future fathers and mothers on how to take care of this valuable human being that they have in their stewardship for some time. And for the sake of integrity of this movement, which again started as a biblical or Christian movement, I need to put some context to where some of these the worldview or the thoughts, that kind of perpetuated some of this. So one of the main biblical verses that have been used, by Kasi, and were kind of a revelation to him about the role of fatherhood, comes from the Bible. When Jesus was baptized or when he was up at the mountain of transfiguration, and he heard the voice of the Father God talking to him and said, "This is my son, whom I love, with whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him." So it discusses 4 different aspects that kind of correlate with some of the evidence-based things that we see in the father's role. And we'll discuss that here in a second. So the father's impact, again, we talked about 6 to 11 years. 4 main things that the movement focuses on is establishing moral authority, conferring identity, emotional security, and affirming potential. On the mother side, we talked about the intellect, but also a very important role because mom, in some ways, is the most, if given a home that has mom and dad and they're biological, and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, all that. One of the important things, and again, this evidence, and research shows that the role of mom to validate the father is very essential so that the children are able to be impacted in a healthy way by the father. If the mother invalidates the father, a lot of these things may be a tug of war where they're not being able to be done in the ideal way. Mom also demonstrates intimacy, provides again caring and nurturing, maintaining social network, and making a home. Now, this does not mean mom does not work outside of the home, but that these are essential roles that affect and impact the children. So one of the things we talked about is identity, and this is I'm kind of taking you through some of the things that this training looks at. So this is kind of like just bullet points. It doesn't cover all the points that are covered by the training, which is typically takes 24 hours for the fathers. The mother design, which is an equivalent kind of training, is quite a shorter one because we really need to focus on the fathers again because of the role being so nebulous in society, and actually sometimes there's a lot of confusion about that. So I think that need to have that emphasis. So part of that is the identity, is kind of looking at our own identity as parents before we're able to deal with our children as well. So sometimes, I may be working out of a presented me, which means what I want people to see me as. And perceived me is basically how people see me. And the actual me is a combination probably of those two, but it's not necessarily the true me. The true me is the potential me in the healthy version of me, being fully able to do what I'm gifted to do with what I have passions to do, et cetera. And a lot of times that's not achieved because of, again, what happens in childhood, and wounds come out of this. So we prevent ourselves or we focus on certain things because of these embedded wounds that have never been healed. So for example, who do you present because you live with a father wound? So keeping people at a distance because of the lack of intimacy at home, becoming a social party animal because of the coldness experienced at home, seeking recognition because you lack affirmation, driven towards success because you are not loved unconditionally, driven by money, materialism because of deep-seated financial insecurity, overcompensating by spoiling children because of the strictness of our dads. I know I have some of these here, and I know probably a lot of the people in the healthcare field have a lot of these as well, because of the drivenness sometimes. But also symptoms of neglect of conferring identity. And again, these things can be done without any ill intention from the parents, but sometimes we give to our kids what we have been given or what we know is best, and it's not always what they need. So neglect of conferring identity can leave a person with what's called an orphan spirit, not knowing where you fit or belong, not knowing your unique significance, feeling like you're adrift in an anchorless boat, plagued by insecurities. I find my identity in work or performance, and I don't know who I am. I have identity confusion. So how about the mother wound? Again, these are just some samples, and I'm not going to say they're completely strict and there's an overlap and all of that, but I think there is some evidence to back these up. Seeking constant validation to prove you're worthy of love. Developing a hard and distant exterior to protect a fragile core. Becoming an over-apologetic, approval-seeking person. Sabotaging healthy relationships because you fear inevitable rejection. Driven by perfectionism that masks deep feelings of inadequacy. Experiencing intense jealousy and possessiveness in adult relationships. Okay, so now I'll just skip a little bit to epigenetics, and I'm just going to explain that just very briefly. That our DNAs typically we inherit them um, as they are, except for mutations that happen. But then there's some switches that are sort of above the DNA that are called, they're made of proteins or histones, and these are other chemicals that sometimes that come in and turn on and off certain DNA, sequences. So they may affect, for example, all the cells pretty much have the same DNA. So how does a brain a cell differ from a skin cell? And that again has to do with these switches that turn off certain sequences for the specific organ system. But in addition to that, in a given organ system or a given part of the body, you might have switches that are turned on and off because of environmental influences, such as stress, pollution, exercise, alcohol, smoking, drugs, etc., or trauma. Um, these have been found to actually be inherited. So if a father was drinking alcohol or was under a tremendous amount of stress, and these genes, the epigenetics got changed, and then he gave birth to children, they can carry these genes that have been switched on and off, which will affect them. And interestingly, there was a big study called the CDC Kaiser Permanente study done about ACEs or traumas that happen in childhood, acute events in childhood that have been correlated one-to-one to some extent with however many risk factors for these traumas it caused an effect down the line in things like cancer, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, autoimmune diseases, and studies that were done in mice kind of prove that. They brought some rats and exposed them to cherry blossoms and then electrocuted them. So it became a trauma response every time, for classical conditioning, every time they smell the cherry blossoms, they would have a trauma response. And then they had these rats, copulate, and then the progeny, which had never been exposed to cherry blossoms, when they were exposed, they had a trauma response. And that was not the case for others that were not conditioned that way. So it is a real thing that these genes. Now, these can be affected again, so they're not permanent. So factors that we can manipulate, like diet, exercise, learning how to reduce stress, or perhaps help with some of the inner healings from the wounds, like we study, studies have shown, about forgiveness, the effect of forgiveness on health and anger and so many other things can perhaps switch some of these genes off. So what do we train to shift our culture? So we train, again, fathers, mothers, and potential fathers and mothers. And by the way, people can act as father and mother figures in society. So coaches, in some cultures where the fathers and the mothers are not really existent too much. In the Seychelles, for example, 90% of children are fatherless. So the homes are run by mother, 90%. South Africa is about 65%. I haven't looked at the latest statistics in the US, but there are countries and cultures that really lack both parents or one of the parents. It's usually the father. This is a picture of me with two South African men. The one on the right, the one in white, has become a good friend. His name is Sibu, and I asked permission to share this slide and his story. So Sibu is somebody that was removed from his home. He was living with his father and mother. His mom took him, I think, around the age of 5, and took him to her mother. without the father knowing. And apparently their grandmother lived in a completely different part of the country or city. I don't know exactly. But his father, and then the mother, after she dropped them off with her mother, said she'll go get something and come back, and never came back. So he was left with his grandmother. And his father looked for him for 5 years until he finally found him. So he was around the age of 9, I guess, or something like that. Don't quote me on that, when he found him. His father took him, and according to Cebu, he was a great man. He was a man of great values. He loved him. He invested a lot in him. He had good moral character. And but then the father, after 5 years, he died, and he was left to himself to be on the streets. Now, during that time, the country, the apartheid of South Africa was, really intense, and the ANC, which is called the National Congress, which is made of black, South Africans, was basically a party that had an arm, basically, that was, a militant arm against the ruling class of white Africans. And he was involved with them. And so he learned how to use weapons. And after a few years, the when Nelson Mandela came to power, and the that apartheid was basically, dissolved to a great extent, the ANC did not really have a big purpose to be militant. So he used his weaponry skill on the streets with gangs, and it just escalated from there. So he ended up incarcerated, with a 30 plus year sentence, and was very, very difficult for him. He was put in isolation, solitary confinement for 3 years. And I think he told me that legally he should only be there for 1 month maximum at a time, but he was there for 3 years, and he tried to commit suicide in his cell. And the only way he could do that was he actually was able to smuggle some matches into his cell, and he put his mattress against the door, and he lit himself. And he actually woke up, found himself in the hospital because of all the smoke, basically suffocated him, and he wasn't severely burnt. But then in the hospital, and then coming back into prison, he started having some soul searching, and I can't remember all the details of the rest of the story, but eventually he did get some clemency, and his sentence was dropped to, I think 11 years or something, and then he was released. So from that point on, he went back to look for his mother. And so he looked for his family and finally found his mother, and he walked in, and everybody was scared like anything you can imagine. He was actually a leader in the most dangerous gang in South Africa. You wouldn't tell by looking at his face here, but so everybody thought he was going to do something to her because of all that she's done to him. But he came in and he presented her actually with a Bible. And he said, "Mom, I want to thank you for taking care of me for the years that you had me. I knew you did the best that you could." Of course, everybody there was just a tremendous, amount of tears, and, they hugged and all that. And then he started a movement, a couple of things. One is that he was helping other people who are in crime. And he started something called, giving back to the parents. So he would, with the help of other people, would go and try to honor older people, parents, and really recognizing that his father's impact for those 5 years is probably what kept him going. It probably what turned him around, and that impact kind of steered him back to do, and have purpose. So I connected with him when I was in South Africa. Actually, he does tours. If you're ever in South Africa, in Cape Town, I definitely highly recommend that. He takes you to the places that tourists don't typically go. To some of the ghettos and some of the places to see really what life has been like and with apartheid and the history. So really incredible cultural tour. Also became friends, and I actually connected him with the World Needs a Father, and he got the training, and then he went to train others, and many of them had no fathers. Like we talked about the statistics. Next to him is actually one of his friends who was actually a follower, and I'm not going to go into the details of his story because I didn't get strict permission from him one-on-one, but I got, permission from Sibu to talk. So one of the things that the World Needs a Father focuses on are 8 building blocks to say, let's bring heaven home. And by the way, they did a lot of training in Egypt. My exposure to CASI initially was in Egypt while I was there. And I did some camps that they had for children, father and child camps, which were really good. But they also did trainings for businesses. They do trainings for, teachers. They do trainings for, of course, parents, for moms. But also they do trainings for leaders and even religious figures. So in Egypt, for example, there was a significant number of imams that came and had the training, and they initially didn't like the title "Heaven at Home," bringing heaven home, because they felt that was somewhat sacrilegious. But after they did the training, they were basically saying the same motto: "Let's bring heaven home." There was an understanding that you can have harmony at home by understanding and respecting the different roles, which some of it really goes across a lot of different across a lot of different cultures and different languages in different countries. So what are these building blocks? And they say, it's not like Lego, you just use one at a time. It's something that needs to be done simultaneously, because if you don't have one of these blocks, it doesn't work as well. But one of the main one is having informed, intentional parenting. Okay. The second one is, again, learning about true self. So you are parenting out of security. A lot of times, and I'm guilty of this, is sometimes, you're insecure in a specific area, so you over discipline or under discipline, or trying to achieve something that you felt like you failed at in your children. And that should not be, the children should not be dealt with that way. They should be who they are, who they're meant to be, and supported. We're learning about what real manhood and womanhood is. Of course, cultures have differences in this, and of course, with time, things have changed. And with the social media, a lot of what real manhood looks like and womanhood looks like has changed significantly globally. But I think digging into that, having those discussions, again, sensitive to the culture, but having those important questions are very important. So many of the very conservative, cultures, for example, I'll give you one example. So I was in a Bedouin village in the coast of the Mediterranean coast in Egypt, being in a Bedouin home. So these are nomads. And I was, they have these, low level sofas or couches. They always assemble together. It's a very, very, communal culture. So I was sitting there sipping tea with them, and then I noticed, electric outlets every, 3 feet in this, basic, 1-story home that, was kind of cultural. And I was like, asked, why do you have so many of these electrical outlets? And they said, for phones. So I said, really? So what's happening is it invaded, this place that was in the desert, and people are sitting there with their phones and not really, communing together as they used to. And then they told me basically there was actually use of phone in schools that were completely made for the Bedouins, by the Bedouins, the government put money, but then they were using the phones for social media, and actually pornography became prevalent in the desert. Now, so you start seeing these things that affect everybody, and then they come up with the questions. Okay, so my kids are having this problem. How do we talk about what manhood in this culture means now that things have shifted in a very big way? where girls from a very conservative culture are involved in pornography at the age of 12 and 13 years old in the desert. Missional home. What does that mean? Meaning that you sit together as a family, husband and wife, or whatever that family looks like, to talk about are the values of our home. So it could be a single mom, it could be single dad, it could be a combination of two partners. What is the values of our home, and how do we want to bring these, kids up, and have an agreement even with the children at some point, if they're old enough, to talk about the values of our homes, and this is how we act. And get some of it. It would be good to get a consensus about it, if possible. And then having a table of support, which means you don't do things alone. And we know from old ages, that it takes a village to raise children. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And we have certainly in the US have strayed away from that because of the mobility, social mobility. And now it's getting even worse, because even when we're together, we're not together because of social media and because of the impact of that. So table of support, having people to confide in, people to coach us, people to mentor us. And they talk about in the training about potentially 8 different people that have played different roles in your life. And also to invest in others as you learn, because that gives purpose and perpetuates the movement. And then focusing on an area of selflessness or sacrificial love. So understanding that if we're just looking for number one, how that's going to impact the rest of the family and the kids. And then it kind of, what goes around comes around. And then joyous, affirming atmosphere. So these are the main training points in the training. So culture change and mind shifts through our training are founded on evidence-based Christian values from this, again, the basics, but again, you adopt culturally and, in the context of the worldview of the host, site for training. So shift from an ignorant and a passive parenting to an intentional, informed parenting, shifting from parenting from insecurities to parenting from true self or healed self, a shift from immature manhood or womanhood to mature personhood that lives with restraint, empathy, and responsibility. A culture change and mind shift to a me orientation, to if you believe in God, or understanding that it's not just about me. So that life needs to be reflected in the modeled way to the children. You shift from, again, a view of just looking at the body and the kids as possessions, or, that, some of the parenting styles that studies show about authoritative versus authoritarian parenthood versus permissive parenthood. So these are some of the things that we get into as well. And individualism to communal thinking and accountability, and shifting from, again, self-love and selfish to understanding that there are sacrifices. And also affirming, one of the biggest things that I see a problem happening is affirming the mother's role and how that impacts the children, because that has been really under attack. And I believe, a working mom is something very essential, but it is not necessarily more superior to a mom who raises children or a mom that does both. And I think understanding the impact of both the father on the children, for the father not to be at work all the time and leave the children unattended or not fulfilling these roles, or the mother, doing these things, the impact will be, will have consequences down the line, which will cost money, emotional stuff, and sometimes some permanent wounds that are difficult to fix later on. So again, shifting from a correction-based upbringing to an affirming and empowering, joyful upbringing. Part of the training is also for single mothers, homes, how to support a mother who's raising that, but also a mother design in general in a fatherless generation. So in developmental psychology, we talked about the importance of the mother validating the father. So there's some models that talk about maternal gatekeeping and co-parenting alliance theories which says that basically consistently show that mother's validation behaves as a primary catalyst for a father's psychological engagement, parenting confidence, and long-term attachment with his children. One of the other important passages that are used from the Bible related to this movement was the fact that there was a situation where there was animosity between the fathers and the children, and that is a curse. And it looks as at some point that this will be turned, that there will be turning of the heart of the parents to their children and the hearts of the children to their parents, or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction. And that's, from Malachi, the Torah, and or the Old Testament, and it's God speaking here through a prophet, Elijah. So to sum it up, fatherlessness distorts identity, leading to fear, guilt, and shame. People driven by insecurity often act from self-protection and self-promotion rather than love and contribution. Our training, or the training of the world needs a father, not per se my training, helps people find healing from these wounds, preventing their transmission to the next generation. So even in leadership, and we see it all around us, wounds from unhealed childhood cause disconnection, insecurity, and leaders either dominate from pride or withdraw from fear. Thus, restoring fatherhood is critical for personal, family, and societal transformation. Thank you very much. I'll take any questions.
Very good. Very good, Nader. So, anybody have any questions they would like to ask? Simply
I do.
Unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, I have a question. I don't know if you can see and hear me, but thank you so much for this excellent presentation. I'm just thinking, who can I share it with? How many people? Should I be like, Mary in the Bible? She went out into the village. Come see a man I've heard about. Come, hear his message again. But anyway, I just wanted to let you know how wonderful it was. What I wanted to ask, in our culture, we've had a significant culture change, and we have mother, father families, particularly when there's sensitivity about the LGBTQI families. And I just wondered how some of your data reflects that.
Yes. So that's a great question. I don't know if I have an answer to your question. I don't know how much of the studies that I've seen some studies, but I haven't really seen a whole lot of studies on it, and I'm not sure how much literature is out there about that. So I kind of will probably defer that question. Somebody knows more about that than myself. Thank you for your comments, the positive comments. I can't really take credit for it again, because most of this is not my material. I'm a messenger, but I felt like it was my duty to share this because it is something that I think has helped so many communities, and I felt like a duty to share that. So I think people from homes that have same-sex couples should look at this and should decide what is appropriate, and kind of like dealing with some of the things. Like I said, there is no home that's going to be perfect, and we are not perfect people. We're not going to be perfect parents. Our parents were not. So part of it is really learning to kind of delve into my own, history and wounds, and see where, has that affected me in my relationships, in my decision making, in raising children, in my workplace, all that. So.
Okay, Antonio, you're next.
Hello, can you
Hello.
hear me?
Speak up a little bit. It's a little hard to hear you.
Okay, I'm from Brazil. I have a question. Doctor, how can we reconcile spiritual education based on Torah for children in a world where parents are abused with activities and children are glued to screens?
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, could you repeat? I missed some of what you said. Do you mind repeating that again, please?
Okay, I repeat. How can we reconcile spiritual education based on the Torah for children in a world where parents are busy with activities and children are glued to screens?
Ah,
Thank you, Doctor.
okay. So let me try to make sure I have the question. So you're saying, how do you infuse spiritual values from the Torah? Is that what I heard? Um, uh, where when the parents are actually busy and the children
Yes,
move to the
yes,
screens.
Torah.
Well, it's a great question. I think a big part of it is modeling. So that's why we start with the parents. The parents need to be on board. So how do you get the parents engaged? And I think that has to start in the community, so, one of the things that in the last 3 years, I've been part of the year in Oklahoma, part of the year in Egypt. And because of connecting dots again about healthcare, social, psychological, emotional things that I see. I try to bring this training here to kind of, meet these needs. So uh, part of it is really speaking to people and starting somewhere, and then maybe getting some leaders in the community where you can actually have these trainings. These trainings can be done online. In Brazil, actually, there is an arm of the World Needs a Father. So there's already activity in Brazil. So I can, if you would like, I'm happy to connect you with that. Or if you go on the website, you will see the Brazil arm, the contact people there. So I don't have a better answer than that. I think it has to start with the parents. Sometimes we leave it to the school or to the place of worship, whether it be temple or mosque or church or whatever, to instill the values, but it really comes from the home by modeling. I think that's what studies typically show most.
Good.
Thank
Camelia,
you.
you're up next.
Well, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I really hope that we can have access to the slides on the website later on.
Yes.
I have a question. So I'm thinking very much of what you described is through the framework of attachment, attachment to parents, and what that does to mental health and protection for future risk. And in the same line of thinking, I'm thinking of attachment to God, which is also a different line of research. What do you think of the idea of attachment to God as a possible solution for these fragmented families where training the parents might be a bit too late and the damage has been already caused and might not be so easy? As someone said, they might be too busy with their lives. And so attachment to God, and I don't even know how that would look like. Well, can that be done by community? Can the parents be educated to instill it in their kids? And what would that do as an adjacent, or I don't think it's going to be ever a replacement for parents, but still another stabilizing relationship in kids' life.
I think it's a wonderful question, and I think there's people here that are probably a lot better equipped to answer that question. I'll say a couple of things that I know about. So there's studies that show, the worldview affects both our physical and emotional and mental well-being. So people that have, believe in God or don't believe in God, and what their view of God is like impacts their health. So if they believe that God is a distant, punishing God, their health is affected negatively more than people that don't even believe in God. Whereas studies, and correct me, Dr. Koenig, if you know a lot, 1,000 times more than I do about this. People that have a view of God that is a relational God, he loves them. He is not out there to try to punish them whenever they do a mistake. He's there to support them, have mercy on them, but gives guidance so that they can have a meaningful and purposeful life. These people do the best. So your point is very well taken, and I think Yes, some people have gone through massive trauma in their life. They don't have parents. You have actually one of the persons that got your training in Oklahoma here. He is a soccer coach at one of the juvenile centers here, one of the biggest juvenile centers in Oklahoma. And he is one of the lost children. I don't know if you've heard of that, lost children that came from Africa. Some of them walked thousands of miles because all their parents were killed in massacres. And he is investing in kids. He was adopted by another family and raised, and so I do think that substitute parenting from healthy parents can help a lot. People have to have their own spiritual journey, obviously, and I think when however the community is, I think that needs to come around and help them in the ideal situation. If it they can contribute in instilling values by modeling. So I think adoptive parents or coaches, so as that coach, for example, has helped some of the kids from the juvenile center. This is a very strict juvenile center, so if the kids don't shape up in 1 year, some of them will have sentences of 20 years plus. So they have a time limit if they don't shape up. So he's helped some people kind of graduate out of that, and then some of them came to the training. So again, by modeling, coaching, teachers, people in church or community can really, I think, affect that. And I think there's definitely a place for that, for wound healing. I don't know about, I know there's some ministries for inner healing. I don't know a ton about those. So maybe some of them are good, maybe some of them are a little bit out there. I don't know all the details, but maybe Dr. Coney can chip in, or somebody else that knows more than me about that.
Good. Chandra, you're up.
Thank you, Dr. Koenig. Can you hear me well enough?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Oh, awesome. So I'll try to be quick, but thank you also to the speaker for your passion in presenting this work. I'm curious about your response to all of the various strong structural factors that can diminish the effectiveness of your work and that could have a profound impact on fatherlessness. For instance, you've mentioned the Congo and, of course, South Africa. And of course, these places have experienced genocides, and I've had the great fortune of visiting and learning about the geopolitical circumstances that have resulted in these communities being divided, if you will, leading to conflicts that lead to massacres. And so, of course, these weren't just innate or natural conflicts, but they were orchestrated by, let's say, higher powers. And I'm not talking in terms of faith, but more so geopolitical circumstances. And so, and also in the United States, where, for instance, there's a very, very famous actress who talks about getting out of poverty through being an actor. But she vividly recalled where she could not get assistance from, let's say, the government unless there wasn't a father in the home. And so there are policies and structures that have led to this fatherlessness. And so what do you think would need to change in order to prevent those higher level structural factors?
Wow, that's a huge, huge asking of me. Yeah, I'm going to play God today, but I will say a couple of things. I think you're absolutely right. It becomes a vicious cycle, So some of the leaders, like I mentioned here, are acting out of woundedness themselves, and they're in a position of power. So they, basically. Do policies or act in ways that are not necessarily going to be healthy for the society. So how do you break that cycle is the question. And can you do it simultaneously? So, I mean, I'd love for some of those leaders to attend the training to understand, their woundedness and what they're acting out of. So there may be some people and some advisors to some of these leaders that perhaps can get their handing on some of this training and get some healing themselves so that they are really, faithful in, stewarding the roles to really, what they vow to take care of the people to do that. So that would be my thing. And I think part of the movement is basically if something gains momentum and people are more understanding of these dynamics, and you can start showing change in this particular community, and then that has benefit to the society, then that can sometimes be supported by even leaders that are not necessarily supportive of some of the intricate parts of the movement per se. I'll give you one example. So in New Jersey, where I practiced a number of years, the state instituted that people who have had drug or alcohol problems go to specific programs that are faith-based, because they found that the uh, the recurrence rate of getting back on drugs and alcohol were extremely less for people that came out of specific programs. Whereas if they just go to the detox or certain rehabs that are state sponsored, the you know the rate for relapses was huge, 80 or 90% versus the other, which is like the other extreme, 90% of no relapse. So I think when you show evidence for benefit, I think that speaks volumes for people who want to hear. Can't guarantee that everybody wants to hear.
Great. Thank you, Nader. And thank you for a terrific presentation today. And thank all of you for participating, for asking your questions, all of which were great. And we'll see you next month in our spirituality and health conference. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.